He moved quietly across the ballroom, a tray of sparkling glasses balanced in one hand, the other tucked neatly behind his back. The soft clink of crystal echoed faintly above the gentle hum of conversation. In the room filled with elegance, from sparkling chandeliers to velvet drapes, he was just another server. The kind that people saw only when they needed a drink or a napkin. No one noticed the way he adjusted the glasses with care, ensuring they were all aligned perfectly on the tray. No one saw the quiet focus in his eyes, how his steps were measured, precise, almost rhythmic with the soft music playing in the background. He blended into the atmosphere, visible yet fully aware of everything around him. Guests in suits and gowns moved through the space. With a mix of casual and rehearsed elegance, laughter rose in soft waves, punctuated by the occasional clink of glasses. Conversations about investments, travel, and upcoming projects floated past him. He moved through them like a shadow, listening, watching, yet never participating. He knew the routines, the expectations, the unspoken rules of this world. He had learned early on that standing out in such places could be dangerous, a mistake that could leave someone embarrassed or overlooked in the wrong way. So, he stayed in the background, silent observer who had long ago perfected the art of being unnoticed. Despite his invisibility, his mind was alert. He noticed the smallest details, a guest nervously fidgeting with a cufflink, a woman adjusting her necklace as she glanced toward the stage, a man in the corner with a subtle smirk as he watched others pass by. He absorbed it all, cataloging these little human habits, these tiny cracks in the veneer of sophistication. It was a skill honed over years, born not from training, but from necessity. He had learned to read people quietly, to understand what they wanted before they even knew it themselves. And tonight, even as he carried drinks from one side of the room to the other, he felt that same quiet awareness buzzing beneath his skin. He moved past a table, where a group of guests were deep in conversation. One of them gestured with a half-empty glass in hand, and he approached silently, offering a refill. "Would you like another drink, sir?" His voice was calm, polite, almost forgotten amid the chatter. The man looked up briefly, nodded, and returned to his conversation. The acknowledgement was small, but it was enough to remind him that in this world he existed only when required. The rest of the time he was invisible, a ghost moving between tables, a facilitator of experiences that belonged to others. He paused for a moment near the grand staircase, letting his eyes sweep across the room. The event was spectacular. Lights reflected off the crystal, casting tiny rainbows across the walls. The orchestra played a gentle tune, filling the space with warmth. Every detail had been planned meticulously. The floral arrangements, the carefully selected music, the placement of every chair and table. And yet, despite all the beauty, he felt a familiar pang of emptiness. He had seen these events countless times from the same perspective, always on the edge, never at the center. He had once dreamed of more, of being someone who commanded attention, who created moments rather than served them. But life had a way of changing plans. Responsibilities had taken precedence, and for now, this was his place. Quiet, careful, unnoticed. As he carried a tray to the far end of the room, he felt the faint tension in the air. A guest whispered something urgently to another, their voices low, but urgent enough for him to catch a fragment. It sounded like someone was running late, someone important. He didn't intervene, his role was clear, but the tiny edge of anticipation that always lingered at events like this made his pulse quicken ever so slightly. Events could shift in a moment, and while he had no power over the plans, he had learned that observing closely could sometimes mean the difference between disaster and smooth sailing. He walked past a woman in a glittering dress who looked directly at him and smiled politely. He smiled back faintly, then moved on. There was a strange sort of satisfaction in these brief acknowledgments. In this world of appearances, he was mostly unseen, but there were moments fleeting, fragile when a guest's recognition reminded him that he existed in their world, even if just for an instant. These moments were rare and treasured, like small jewels hidden among the routine of his work. As the evening progressed, he found himself glancing toward the stage area more frequently. There was a certain energy building there, something that drew his attention without fully explaining why. Perhaps it was the way the organizers moved with urgent purpose, or the subtle shift in the music that suggested something significant was about to happen. He didn't know yet, but he sensed it. The quiet thrill of anticipation that he had felt countless times in other rooms, other events. His instincts, honed over years, told him to watch closely. He paused near a side table to adjust the placement of some glasses. His hands moved smoothly, almost mechanically, but there was a careful precision in each motion. He checked the alignment, the spacing, the angle, all small things that most people would never notice. Yet for him, attention to detail was a matter of pride. Even if no one ever thanked him, even if no one ever saw the work he put into these small moments, he felt a quiet satisfaction in doing them right. There was a rhythm to his movements, a calmness in the repetition, a sense of purpose that few could understand. As the orchestra shifted to a livelier piece, he moved again, weaving between clusters of guests. He overheard snippets of conversation, catching phrases like incredible opportunity and must-see performance. He filed them away as he always did, knowing that details often mattered more than they seemed. Sometimes the smallest piece of information could become critical in a moment of chaos. His mind worked quietly, efficiently, cataloging every gesture, every word, every expression. He was unseen, but not unprepared. At one point, a guest dropped a small item, a cufflink perhaps, or a piece of jewelry. He noticed immediately, picked it up carefully, and waited for the right moment to return it. The guest, distracted by conversation, barely noticed the exchange. To anyone else, it was invisible, nothing more than routine service. But for him, it was a moment of connection, however minor, a thread linking him to the lives swirling around him. These were the fragments of human interaction that made his long hours meaningful, even if they were fleeting. As the night wore on, the room grew warmer, the chatter louder, the clinking of glasses more pronounced. He moved steadily, never rushing, never drawing attention. Yet beneath the calm exterior, his mind was alert, cataloging, anticipating. Every event had its rhythms, and he had learned to feel them, to predict them, to move in harmony with the shifting currents of human activity. It was a skill born of necessity, refined by experience, and it made him quietly confident in a world that often overlooked him. Near the end of the first hour, he paused again, scanning the room. A moment caught his eye, a man gesturing in frustration toward the stage. An organizer moving quickly with papers in hand, a group of guests whispering urgently. Something was about to happen, something that would demand attention, and he could feel the subtle tension rising. He stayed back, careful to remain unnoticed, yet every instinct in his body was alert, prepared for whatever might unfold. The quiet observer was always ready, even if the world rarely asked for his presence. He carried his tray toward the back of the room, weaving skillfully between guests who barely acknowledged him. And yet, for all the careful invisibility, there was an unmistakable sense that this night was different. The air felt charged, alive, like the calm before a storm. He didn't know what would happen, only that something was coming. Something that might break the delicate balance of routine he had perfected over so many years. His pulse quickened, just slightly, a reminder that beneath the composed exterior, he was human, fully alive, and deeply connected to the world he often moved through unnoticed. Even as he continued his work, pouring drinks, arranging glasses, returning lost items, he felt a strange mixture of anticipation and calm. This was the life he had chosen, nor perhaps the life he had been given, and he had learned to navigate it with grace, patience, and quiet dignity. And tonight, as he moved through the room, invisible yet fully present, he had no way of knowing that the next moments would challenge everything he had accepted, and that in a very short time, he would step from the shadows into a spotlight, never expected. He moved back into the kitchen after finishing the last round of drinks, carefully setting the tray down on the counter. The clatter of glasses faded behind the heavy doors, and for a brief moment he could breathe. The kitchen smelled of warm bread and simmering sauces, a comforting reminder that life could be simple even amid chaos. He leaned against the counter for a second, letting his shoulders relax, and allowed his mind to wander into the past. Memories he rarely visited surfaced quietly, like shadows stretching across a room. They reminded him of who he had once been and the life he had once dreamed of living. He had grown up in a small town, far from the glittering world he now moved through. His childhood had been filled with quiet determination, endless curiosity, and a talent that even he hadn't fully understood at first. There had been people who recognized it, mentors who encouraged him, in moments that made him believe he could rise to heights few imagined. But life had a way of changing plans. Responsibilities, losses, and unexpected setbacks had redirected him, nudging him toward survival rather than ambition. He had taken jobs that paid the bills and offered stability, but none of them allowed him to shine. He had learned to hide his skills, to keep his talents locked away in the recesses of his mind, because showing them now might bring attention. He wasn't ready to handle. He wiped his hands on his apron and walked toward the small staff area, where a few of his colleagues were chatting quietly. Their voices were light, filled with jokes and casual complaints about long shifts and tricky guests. He smiled faintly at the sound, though he rarely joined in. Conversation, even lighthearted, felt like a risk. He had learned that the more visible he became, the higher the chance of mistakes, misjudgments, or being overlooked in a world that prized appearances over substance. Still, he watched them carefully, noting expressions, gestures, and tones. Observation was a habit, a tool that had kept him safe, useful, and quietly effective for years. He remembered the first time someone had truly noticed his skill. Not the service he provided, but the depth of his understanding. It had been years ago, at a small event that seemed ordinary to everyone else. A problem had arisen, something technical, something that required quick thinking and calm execution. Without thinking, he had stepped forward, offered a solution, and executed it perfectly. The room had gone quiet for a moment, then erupted in whispers. People looked at him differently, for the first time seeing not just a server, but someone capable of much more. That moment had been intoxicating, a brief taste of recognition he had nearly forgotten. But life moved on, responsibilities returned, and the world he had glimpsed faded again into the shadows. Where he had learned to live, he prepared another tray of drinks for the next round, his hands moving efficiently, almost automatically. Yet his mind drifted back to dreams he had once had, plans he had made but never followed through. He had imagined himself performing, creating, leading, or simply showing the world what he could do. Those dreams had been alive and vibrant once, full of possibility. But financial hardship and family obligations had changed everything. He had traded ambition for stability, excitement for routine, and the world he had once imagined became something he watched from afar, never daring to enter again. The contrast between that world and his current life sometimes left him unsettled. A subtle ache he carried quietly within him. The kitchen was busy but controlled. Other staff members moved around, laughing softly, checking orders, and making sure everything ran smoothly. He glanced at a young newcomer fumbling with a tray, unsure of the proper etiquette for this high-profile event. For a moment, he considered stepping in, offering guidance, but then hesitated. He rarely gave unsolicited help. Experience had taught him that showing too much could lead to questions, criticism, or even resentment. Still, he noted the mistakes, storing the information for later, understanding that sometimes even observation was power. Knowledge, even if unseen, gave him a quiet edge. He poured sparkling water into glasses, carefully checking each one for bubbles and clarity, ensuring that every presentation was flawless. It was a small ritual, but one that brought him comfort. Attention to detail had always been his strength, something that set him apart even when no one noticed. He thought about the life he might have had if circumstances were different, if he had pursued his talent without pause. The thought was bittersweet. He knew that dreams left unfulfilled could weigh heavily on a person. But he also knew that talent, like a hidden flame, never truly dies. It waits quietly for the right moment to ignite again. During a brief break, he stepped outside to the small balcony at the back of the venue. The night air was cool, and the city lights shimmered in the distance. He leaned on the railing, letting the quiet settle over him. Here, Away from the clinking glasses and soft music, he allowed himself to remember more vividly. He remembered hours spent practicing, refining skills no one in this room could guess he possessed. He remembered mentors who had pushed him, friends who had believed in him, and the exhilaration of moments when everything had clicked perfectly. Each memory was a reminder of what he had once been capable of, silent testament to the talent he had kept hidden for so long as he watched the city below. He thought about the contrasts in his life. The life he now led, so close to elegance and power yet always separated by distance, was both frustrating and oddly comforting. He had security, he had routine, and he had the satisfaction of knowing that he performed his role perfectly. And yet, the glimpses of what could have been what might still be lingered at the edges of his mind. There was a quiet longing, a gentle pull that reminded him that the flame of his old dreams had never gone out. It was merely waiting for the right spark to return to life. He returned to the kitchen as the next wave of guests began to arrive. The energy in the room shifted, slightly faster, slightly more urgent. Conversations became louder, laughter more animated. He moved through the space as always, tray balanced, hands steady, eyes alert. And yet beneath the surface, he felt that subtle tension again. Something was changing. He didn't know what, only that the rhythm of the night had shifted, and his instincts told him to be ready. Years of experience had taught him that events like these often contained unexpected turns, and he had learned to prepare quietly, always observing, always waiting. He caught sight of the organizer moving quickly, papers clutched tightly in hand, speaking urgently to someone at the head of the room. The words were muffled, but he caught the sharp edge of worry in their tone. Something was off. Perhaps a performance had been delayed or a technical issue had arisen. He didn't intervene immediately because that was not his place, but he felt the familiar stir of anticipation that always accompanied such moments. He knew that when chaos struck, someone had to remain calm, and he had long since become practiced at being that calm presence. Even if no one noticed it, for a few minutes, he continued his routine, pouring drinks, returning to the kitchen for refills, placing glasses with precision. Yet every movement was now accompanied by a subtle mental checklist. What was happening at the stage? What the guests were noticing? How the organizers were reacting? His mind worked quietly, mapping the dynamics of the room, noting the tensions, the gestures, and the unspoken signals. Observation had become a second nature, and it gave him a sense of control in a world that often felt unpredictable. He paused briefly near a table of guests, listening to fragments of conversation. Words like delay, important, and schedule reached him. He cataloged them quickly, filing the information away. He didn't act, but he remained aware. His presence, so quiet and unobtrusive, allowed him to absorb details that others might miss. It was a skill developed over years of moving through similar events, learning to notice without being noticed, understanding without intruding. It was a quiet power, invisible but real. As the night deepened, he found himself drawn again toward the stage area. There was a tension there now, a focused energy, a hum of anticipation that had not been present earlier. He moved closer, careful to remain unseen, observing the flurry of activity, the subtle gestures of organizers, the expressions on the faces of the staff. His instincts told him that something significant was about to unfold. He didn't know what it would be, only that the moment could change the course of the night, and perhaps in ways he could not yet predict. His own place in it, returning briefly to the kitchen. He took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill his lungs. He reminded himself of the skills he had hidden for so long, the talents that had lain dormant while life pressed him into routine. He had survived, adapted, and remained unnoticed for a reason. But the thought that his moment might finally come sent a subtle thrill through him. He wiped his hands on his apron, adjusted the tray for the next round, and prepared to move back into the room. The past had shaped him, the present demanded his diligence, and the future, though uncertain, offered the faintest glimmer of possibility. And he, quietly, patiently, was ready for whatever came next. He stepped back into the ballroom, tray in hand, and immediately sensed the change in the air. There was a tension, subtle but undeniable, that made the polished room feel alive in a different way. Conversations quieted slightly as people turned their attention toward the stage. He moved carefully between tables, placing drinks with calm precision. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. His instincts, honed through years of observation, told him to pay close attention. Something in the rhythm of the room had shifted, and he had learned to trust that sensation. Near the stage, he saw organizers whispering urgently to one another. Papers held tightly in their hands, gestures sharp and deliberate. A few of the guests had noticed the subtle signs of disruption and exchanged puzzled looks. A minor panic was building, though most attendees were too polite to make it obvious. He moved closer, blending into the background as always, and began to quietly observe. Every small movement, every expression, every hurried step mattered. He cataloged them as he always did, knowing that when events went off script, knowledge could be the difference between disaster and control. A sudden murmur ran through the room. A key performer, someone critical to the main presentation, had been delayed. The organizers were clearly stressed, making last-minute arrangements, whispering urgently into phones, adjusting schedules, and shifting responsibilities. The guests sensed the tension, and a few began checking watches or leaning toward their companions, asking low questions. The atmosphere, once smooth and elegant, now carried a quiet anxiety, a feeling that something important had gone wrong. He didn't intervene yet, but he could feel the anticipation building inside him. That spark that told him tonight might be unlike any other. He approached a table where guests had paused mid-conversation, glancing toward the stage. Their attention was not on him, and that suited him fine. He offered refills, smiled faintly, and moved on without a word. Every small act of service kept the rhythm of the room steady, even as the tension increased elsewhere. He had long learned that calmness in the background could quietly influence the mood, a stabilizing presence that went unnoticed but mattered all the same. Behind the stage, the disarray was becoming more pronounced. A microphone had not been set up correctly, some props were missing, and a manager was frantically making phone calls. The server, standing a discreet distance away, took a deep breath and assessed the situation. Years of hidden talent and practice stirred within him. He recognized the problem immediately. It's not just the surface issues, but the subtle chain reactions that could escalate if ignored. A choice lay before him: intervene and risk stepping out of his invisible role, or stay in the shadows and let the chaos unfold. He hesitated for only a moment, then resolved silently that he would act. But carefully. He stepped forward just enough to catch the attention of one of the harried organizers. "I think I can help," he said softly, almost in passing, careful not to sound too assertive. The organizer turned, surprised, then frowned. "Do you know how to handle this?" they asked, voice tinged with disbelief. He nodded calmly. "I do. Just give me a moment." The room had no idea what was about to happen, and he liked it that way. For years, he had remained unseen, observing, preparing, waiting for the right moment. Now, that moment had quietly arrived. He moved quickly and efficiently behind the stage, directing adjustments, fixing the microphone, arranging the props. His movements were confident, precise, and quiet. He communicated without unnecessary words, guiding the staff in subtle ways that corrected the problems before they escalated. The organizer, initially hesitant, began to follow his lead, watching as tasks were executed smoothly and calmly. Guests remained mostly unaware of the small interventions. Though the atmosphere subtly began to shift, the tension easing almost imperceptibly. The server, for the first time that evening, felt a surge of focus and purpose. This was more than service. This was action that required skill, judgment, confidence, the very talents he had kept hidden for so long as the moments passed. The delay that threatened the event started to fade. The performer, still late, had their space and setup prepared perfectly, thanks to his quiet interventions. He checked the details one last time, ensuring that every cable, microphone, and prop was in its place. He stepped back, allowing the staff to handle the final adjustments, confident that everything was now ready. The organizers were still tense, but the panic had been replaced with relief, a subtle shift that made the room feel stable again. The server allowed himself a fleeting smile, a quiet satisfaction that came not from recognition, but from knowing he had made a difference. A guest walked past him, still focused on the stage, and he caught a fragment of conversation. "Everything looks fine now?" the guest murmured to their companion. The words were small, almost incidental, but to him they were confirmation that the calm had returned. He moved back into the main room, resuming his duties, pouring drinks, offering polite smiles, all while keeping his mind alert. He felt a strange mixture of excitement and caution. For years, he had operated in the background, solving problems quietly. Tonight, however, had given him a taste of what it felt like to act decisively, to influence events in a meaningful way, to step beyond the invisible role he had long occupied. As he navigated the room, he noticed subtle changes. The staff now moved with a little more confidence. The guests began to relax. And even the orchestra seemed to play with slightly more energy, as if sensing the return of order. He watched carefully, noting each change, cataloging every detail, aware that in moments like these, perception often mattered as much as action. The balance he had restored was delicate, and even a small misstep could ripple through the event. But he moved with calm assurance, a quiet force that ensured the evening remained intact. A few minutes later, the delayed performer arrived. The server observed from a discreet distance as they took their place on the stage, adjusting their equipment, checking the microphone, and interacting with the organizers. He could see the tension in their eyes, the nerves that often accompanied high-stakes moments. He stepped closer only enough to offer a brief, quiet suggestion, a tip on setup that made the performer nod in understanding. No one in the room realized how critical that intervention had been, but he knew. And that knowledge, hidden as it was, brought him a sense of quiet triumph. The event began as planned, smoothly and without further incident. Guests applauded the opening, unaware of the near disruption that had been quietly managed behind the scenes. The server moved through the room, still carrying drinks, still smiling politely, still unnoticed, yet fully aware of the impact he had made. For the first time in years, he felt the subtle thrill of recognition, not from applause or praise, but from knowing that his skill, his experience, and his instincts had mattered. In a world that had often overlooked him, it quietly shaped the course of the evening as the night progressed. He noticed small glances, brief moments when guests seemed to take note of his calm presence. A subtle recognition, fleeting and uncertain, but it stirred something inside him. For so long he had remained in the shadows, a silent observer, a quiet facilitator. Tonight he had stepped beyond that role, not boldly but carefully, and the effect had been undeniable. He felt a faint but undeniable sense of possibility, a reminder that even hidden talent could make a difference when the right moment arrived. He continued his work, moving with steady hands, attentive eyes, and a calm presence. Each drink poured, each tray delivered. Each smile offered was now tinged with a quiet confidence that had not been there before. The world around him remained largely unaware of the quiet heroism unfolding in their midst. Yet he knew, and that was enough. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine what might be possible if moments like this could happen again. If skill and opportunity could finally meet, if the world could see the abilities he had long kept hidden as the part of the evening unfolded. The server remained vigilant, ready to act if needed, but also quietly savoring the sense of purpose he had regained. His mind replayed each decision, each intervention, each subtle adjustment that had prevented disaster. He felt the familiar satisfaction of mastery, tempered by humility and discretion. The night was far from over, but he had already achieved something rare. He had stepped beyond invisibility, demonstrating quietly, without fanfare, that he was capable of more than anyone had suspected. And he knew deep down that this was only the beginning of a night that might very well change everything. The performer finally stepped onto the stage, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Guests leaned slightly forward in their chairs, murmurs quieting as anticipation filled the air. The server watched from the side, his tray forgotten at his feet for a moment, eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before him. He had prepared for this in quiet ways, through years of hidden practice, through patience, through observation. Now it all came together in a single, unassuming moment that had the power to change everything. He felt a subtle but undeniable rush of energy, a thrill that mingled with calm control. The performer began, and the effect was immediate. Every motion, every note, every gesture was executed flawlessly. The audience, which had been tense just moments before, became captivated, caught in the magic of the performance. Some leaned closer, eyes wide. Some whispered to one another in admiration, and others held their breath in awe. The server watched not from the stage but from the shadows, feeling the resonance of the moment as if it were his own. For a long time, he had watched others shine from a distance. And now, though still mostly unseen, he was connected to the brilliance that filled the room. As the performance continued, a subtle shift occurred. The staff, now relaxed, moved with a quiet confidence, handling drinks and maintaining the flow of the event. The guests, entirely absorbed, forgot the earlier tension. It was remarkable how one act could transform an entire space. He moved quietly, observing, ensuring that everything remained seamless. His attention to detail, honed through years of unnoticed service, allowed him to anticipate needs before they arose. Each glass delivered, each guest attended to, became part of the rhythm of the night. A small thread in a larger tapestry, now being woven with perfection. He noticed a few guests glancing in his direction. Brief and subtle acknowledgments, as if sensing his calm presence in a room that was otherwise filled with awe at the stage. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel the recognition that he had long denied himself. Not the loud applause, not the spotlight, but the quiet, almost imperceptible acknowledgement that he mattered, that his experience, his judgment, his skill had contributed to this moment. It was enough to make his heart beat a little faster, not from pride, but from a sense of belonging he had rarely experienced. The performer's routine intensified, and the server felt a surge of alignment between his past and the present. The skills he had honed in hidden corners of his life, the patience, the discipline, the keen observation, all of it had led to this moment. Each step he had taken, every unnoticed effort, every quiet act of diligence, seemed suddenly connected to the room's collective focus. He realized that he had always been preparing for this in ways he had not recognized. And the knowledge brought a strange, grounding joy. The crowd's awe was palpable, yet he felt no envy, only a profound connection to the energy of creation. The beauty of talent realized. A section of the audience erupted in applause, spontaneous and sincere, breaking through the lingering tension. The performer smiled, confident, aware that the room was fully engaged. And though no one outside the immediate stage area saw him, the server felt a subtle acknowledgement in the air, a recognition that the seamless flow and readiness of the event had been quietly guided. He moved again, placing drinks, adjusting trays, maintaining the rhythm without drawing attention to himself. It was a delicate balance, being invisible while holding a quiet control, orchestrating subtle support that made the brilliance possible. The performance reached a climactic moment, and he could feel the room leaning collectively toward the stage, every eye fixed, every ear attuned. In the shadows, he allowed himself a deep breath, recognizing the full weight of the moment. For years he had been on the edge of recognition, watching, waiting, preparing, and now. The culmination of his patience, skill, and experience was reflected in the audience's engagement. He realized that brilliance could emerge in unexpected ways, that preparation and quiet readiness could make someone indispensable without a single word of praise. The performer executed the final part flawlessly, and the room erupted. Applause, cheers, and whistles filled the air. Guests clapped with genuine enthusiasm, some standing, some whispering their admiration to companions. Cameras clicked, phones recorded, and the energy of satisfaction and amazement spread throughout the hall. The server, still mostly unnoticed, allowed himself a small, quiet smile. He had facilitated this moment, ensured its smooth execution, felt the profound satisfaction that came from knowing his actions, though unseen, mattered immensely. Recognition was not always public, he realized, but it could still be deeply rewarding, as the crowd's attention eventually shifted to mingling and conversation. continued to move quietly among them, ensuring drinks were refilled, guests attended to, and the flow of the event remained uninterrupted. Every smile he offered, every glass he delivered, carried the subtle confidence that had grown in him over the course of the evening. He understood in a way that few others could, that excellence often exists unseen, in the careful preparation and quiet intervention that make the spectacular possible. He noticed a few staff members stealing glances, curiosity, and subtle respect in their eyes. Perhaps they sensed the calm authority he had demonstrated without drawing attention. He returned to the kitchen briefly, refilling trays and straightening supplies, allowing himself a moment of reflection. The night had shifted, not just for the guests or the performers, but for him. A quiet bridge had been crossed. He had moved beyond being a passive observer, acted with skill and purpose, and had seen the immediate effects of his interventions. The recognition he felt internally was more valuable than any applause. It's more sustaining than any public acknowledgement. As the evening wound toward its later stages, he continued his quiet vigilance. The event flowed seamlessly now. Guests relaxed and entertained, performers confident, and staff moving efficiently under the subtle influence of his prior guidance. He understood that true impact is often invisible to the casual observer. Yet, to those who notice closely, the effects are unmistakable. He moved with the calm assurance that comes from experience, from preparation. From a deep understanding of human behavior and the flow of events, the performer finally left the stage, and the audience slowly transitioned from admiration to casual conversation. The energy of the room had shifted completely, from tension to exhilaration, from uncertainty to awe. He continued his rounds, offering service, maintaining rhythm, and observing quietly. And in the subtle glances and tiny acknowledgments that occasionally reached him, he recognized a form of validation that had been absent from his life for years. It was not loud or public, but it was sincere and meaningful. It was a reminder that the value of skill, patience, and quiet action often transcends the need for immediate recognition. Later, in a quiet moment near the back of the ballroom, he allowed himself a few seconds to reflect on the evening. His heart still carried a quiet thrill from the events that had unfolded. For so long he had existed on the periphery, watching brilliance, facilitating it, never daring to step fully into the light. Tonight, he had glimpsed what it felt like to be connected to that brilliance in a meaningful, decisive way. He understood, in a deeply human sense, that talent and preparation do not vanish. They wait for the right moment. They find the right opportunity. And they manifest when the timing aligns. The room was alive with conversation, laughter, and applause that continued to echo faintly. He moved through the final rounds of service with steady hands and attentive eyes. And though no one outside the immediate space of the stage might fully comprehend his role, he knew it. That knowledge, quiet and profound, was enough. It had been a night that reminded him that unseen work can be transformative. That skill nurtured over years can emerge in moments of crisis, and that quiet, human-centered action can create ripples that extend far beyond. What the eye can see, as he returned to the kitchen for the final time, tray empty, hands steady, he took a moment to breathe. He had witnessed, facilitated, and been connected to something remarkable. The world of the ballroom, once distant and untouchable, had briefly included him in its brilliance. And though he would return to his usual quiet presence in the coming days, he carried with him a new sense of self-confidence that arose not from external applause, but from the deep, human understanding that his talents, long hidden, could impact the world in ways both subtle and extraordinary. As the final notes of the evening's performance faded into soft chatter, moved quietly among the guests, collecting empty glasses, offering polite smiles, and ensuring everything was in order. The room now hummed with conversation, laughter, and reflections on the performance that had captivated everyone just minutes before. He moved efficiently, almost automatically, but there was a subtle lightness in his step that had not been there at the beginning of the night. Something had shifted within him. He had stepped beyond the role of a silent observer, had acted decisively, and now carried the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing he had made a meaningful impact. guests began to leave. Some thanking the staff politely, some barely noticing the quiet heroes who had kept the night flowing seamlessly. He caught glimpses of smiles, small nods, brief moments of acknowledgement. It was not the loud applause or public recognition that mattered most, but these tiny gestures of awareness. They were reminders that even in roles designed to be invisible, contribution could be noticed, even if only in fleeting, subtle ways. And in those moments, he allowed himself to feel pride, not loud or boastful, but deep and human, rooted in the knowledge that he had been essential to the night's success. Back in the kitchen, he began cleaning and organizing for the next day, hands moving with the steady rhythm of long practice. Yet his mind replayed the evening's events, the crisis before the performance, the subtle interventions he had made, the calm and preparation that had guided everything. It all came together in a way that left him quietly awed. He realized that he had been living on the edges of recognition for years. But tonight had allowed him a glimpse of how unseen effort could shape outcomes in profound ways. The knowledge was sustaining, a reminder that value is not always measured in applause or attention, but in quiet competence and steady action. He paused for a moment, leaning against the counter, letting the hum of the now empty ballroom settle in his mind. He thought about the performer who had delivered a flawless presentation, unaware of the subtle guidance that had enabled the smooth execution. He reflected on the organizers, who had managed the logistics without realizing that a quiet presence had stabilized the chaos. And he thought about himself, the invisible thread running through it all, holding the night together with careful attention, calm judgment, and steady hands. It was a humbling realization, but also empowering. For the first time in a long while, he understood that his contributions, though unseen, were significant. The staff gathered for a final debrief, sharing brief reflections on the night's events. Some were tired, others exhilarated, but all were bound by the shared effort that had kept the evening seamless. He joined quietly, offering input when necessary, observing interactions, and noting lessons for future events. Even in the absence of recognition, he found a deep satisfaction in participating fully, knowing that preparation, skill, and patience had combined to create something extraordinary. The quiet pride he felt was unlike any he had experienced before. It was real, human, and deeply satisfying. As the last guests departed, he stepped outside for a moment, breathing in the cool night air. The city lights shimmered in the distance, and for a few seconds, he allowed himself to reflect fully on the journey that had brought him here. From years of quiet diligence to moments of crisis management, from invisible service to subtle yet decisive influence, the night had illustrated a truth he had long understood but rarely experienced so vividly. Skill, patience, and readiness could make a difference, even when no one noticed. And when recognition finally arrives, it often does so quietly, subtly, and in unexpected ways. He thought about the possibility of what could come next. The evening had been a turning point, not because anyone had shouted his name from the stage, but because he had seen the impact of his actions reflected in the smooth flow of events, the smiles of guests, and the confidence of staff. It was a profound reminder that opportunity and preparation often meet in moments we cannot predict, and that the value of quiet competence should never be underestimated. He carried this understanding like a small flame, a private affirmation that his skills, long hidden, could influence outcomes meaningfully. Returning to his small apartment later that night, he settled into a chair, exhausted but exhilarated. The events of the evening played through his mind like a movie, each scene reinforcing the realization that he had acted decisively, effectively, and with quiet authority. He thought about the people who had unknowingly relied on him, the guests who had benefited from his interventions, the performers who had unknowingly been supported by his preparation. In all of it, he recognized a thread of continuity. His readiness, his attention to detail, and his patience had mattered. And in that recognition, he found a sense of peace